In the world of the ultra-rich, everything is a commodity, and every person has a price. Billionaire Damian Sterling, a man who built his empire on cold calculation, saw the waitress who'd spilled wine on him as a simple line item of inconvenience. For his own cruel amusement, he made a public dare-a-bet designed to humiliate her on the dance floor in front of the city's elite. He expected tears. He expected failure. What he never calculated, what he could never have accounted for, was that beneath her simple uniform was a fire he could never hope to own, and a forgotten dream about to explode into the light. The air in the Grand Astoria's celestial ballroom was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. It was a suffocating mixture for Isabella Rossi, who preferred the honest smell of rain on pavement or the lemon-scented cleaner she used on the floors of her tiny queen's apartment. Here, everything was gilded, shimmering, and false. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls of light hung from a ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds. Below, a sea of tailored Tom Ford suits and glittering designer gowns swirled around the room, their laughter tinkling like carefully orchestrated wind chimes. For Bella, this world was a cage she entered 5 nights a week. Her uniform, a stiff black dress with a starchy white apron, felt like a costume separating her from the glamorous creatures she served. Each perfectly chilled glass of Laurent Perrier she balanced on her silver tray was a reminder of the chasm between their lives and hers. The tray was heavy tonight, not just with crystal flutes, but with the weight of her reality, her mother's mounting medical bills, the second physical therapy consultation they couldn't afford, and the dull, persistent ache in her right ankle that was a constant ghost of a life she no longer lived. Across the room she saw him, Damian Sterling. Even in a room full of powerful men, he was the sun around which they all orbited. He wasn't just wealthy. He was dynasty rich, the 3rd generation to helm Sterling Enterprises, a global conglomerate that had its fingers in everything from tech to real estate. He was tall, with sharp, impossibly handsome features that looked as though they'd been carved from granite. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. They swept the room with an air of bored possession, as if he were merely surveying his assets. Hanging from his arm was Chloe Davenport, a ballerina whose face graced the covers of dance magazines. She was technically perfect, from her flawless posture to her surgically precise smile. She was the kind of woman Damian Sterling would have an exquisite, beautiful accessory who complemented his power. Bella's job was simple: be invisible. A ghost who refilled glasses and cleared plates, seen but not heard. She moved with a practiced grace, a muscle memory from a different life, navigating the crowded floor with an efficiency that went unnoticed. That was the goal, to be unnoticed. But fate, or maybe just the careless shove of a drunk stockbroker, had other plans. A man stumbled backward, bumping her arm just as she was reaching for an empty glass. Time seemed to warp, slowing down to a crawl. The silver tray tilted. One lone champagne flute, still half full, slid toward the edge. Bella's reflexes, honed over years of relentless training, kicked in. She twisted her body, trying to catch it, but she was too late. The glass didn't shatter on the floor. It did something far worse. It landed squarely on the pristine white dinner jacket of Damian Sterling, splashing golden champagne in a V-shape down his chest. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. The music seemed to fade. All eyes which had so carefully avoided her moments before were now fixed on her. The ghost had become solid, and she was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Damian Sterling looked down at his ruined jacket, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he slowly lifted his gaze, and his stormy eyes locked onto Bella. There was no anger in them. There was something much, much colder, utter dismissal. "Do you have any idea how much this jacket costs?" he asked, his voice low and cutting, yet it carried across the sudden silence. It wasn't really a question. It was a statement of her inadequacy. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. It was an accident." Bella stammered, her face burning with humiliation. She reached for a napkin, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "Don't touch it," he commanded. "You've done enough." Chloe Davenport looked Bella up and down with a sneer. Some people just don't belong in places like this. They lack the grace. The word grace struck Bella like a physical blow. It was the one thing she once had in abundance, the one thing that had been stolen from her. The floor manager, a weaselly man named Mr. Henderson, scurried over his face, pale with panic. "Mr. Sterling, my deepest apologies. We will handle this immediately. The cost of the jacket will be taken care of. The girl will be fired, of course." Fired? The word echoed in the silent, cavernous space of Bella's mind. Fired meant no money for her mother's medication. Fired meant eviction notices. Fired was the end of the line. A strange defiant spark ignited in her chest. She had been invisible. She had been humble. She had bowed and scraped and endured the condescending looks for months. But to be fired over an accident, to be dismissed as a graceless, clumsy oaf, it was too much. She lifted her chin, meeting Damien's cold gaze directly. "It was an accident. And for the record, I have plenty of grace." A dangerous, amused glint appeared in Damien's eyes. He was intrigued by her defiance. It was a novelty, like a toy that had suddenly squeaked back at him. He let his eyes travel down her worn-out server shoes, then back up to her flushed, determined face. "Grace," he scoffed softly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "A waitress in orthopedic shoes is telling me about Grace." He gestured to the sprawling marble dance floor in the center of the ballroom. The band was setting up for the first dance. "My companion, Miss Davenport, is the epitome of grace. She is a professional, an artist." He looked from the perfectly poised Chloe to the humiliated Bella. An idea, ugly and theatrical, began to form. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to crush this little spark of defiance under the heel of his $1,000 shoe. "I'll make you a deal," Damien announced, his voice now projecting for the captivated audience of elites. "You seem so confident in your grace. Prove it." He pointed a finger toward Chloe. "Dance, right here, right now. The first dance. If you can hold the attention of this room for 3 minutes next to a professional like Miss Davenport, I'll forget this ever happened. In fact, I'll personally double the tips for the entire serving staff tonight." The staff, hidden in the shadows, collectively held their breath. It was a fortune. But Damien continued, his voice dropping to a silken threat. "If you stumble, if you falter, if you make a fool of yourself, which you will not only be fired, but you will get on your knees and personally scrub the champagne stain from my shoes with this napkin." The crowd murmured. It was a Roman circus, and they had just been offered a Christian to the lions. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. Bella stood frozen. It was an impossible choice. Public humiliation versus certain financial ruin. He was trapping her, ensuring she would be broken one way or another. He expected her to cower, to refuse, to burst into tears and beg for her job. But as she looked at his arrogant face, at Chloe's smug smirk, she didn't feel fear. She felt a white-hot rage she hadn't felt in years. He thought grace was about posture and money. He thought art belonged only to the people in this room. He didn't know that grace was also about survival. It was about standing up when the world had spent years trying to keep you on your knees. She looked at her worn shoes, the ones that helped her get through 10-hour shifts on her aching ankle. She thought of her mother's tired smile, and she thought of the girl she used to be, the one who lived and breathed for the dance. Slowly, deliberately, Bella untied the strings of her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the now empty silver tray. She looked Damien Sterling dead in the eye. "Fine," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with a strength no one in that room could have expected. "I accept your deal. But you're going to need a bigger napkin." The walk to the edge of the dance floor was the longest of Bella's life. The whispers followed her like hungry wasps, a chorus of mockery and disbelief. "Is she serious?" Damien is ruthless. This is social suicide. She ignored them, focusing on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. With each step on the cool, polished marble, she wasn't just walking away from her serving station. She was walking back through time into a part of herself she had locked away and tried to forget. 5 years earlier, the only floors she walked on were the sprung wood floors of the Juilliard School. She hadn't been Isabella Rossi Waitress. She had been La Bella Rossi, the prodigy from Queens who had clawed her way into the world's most prestigious performing arts school on a full scholarship. Dance wasn't what she did. It was what she was. Her days were a blur of sweat, pain, and transcendent moments of flight. Her nights were spent soaking her aching muscles, studying anatomy, and dreaming of the stages she would one day command. Her mentor, the legendary maestro Anton Petrov, a stern Russian bear of a man who had defected during the Cold War, saw the fire in her. "You have it, Devochka," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "Others, they dance the steps. You dance the music. It is in your blood." He pushed her harder than anyone else, seeing not just talent but a raw, untamable passion that could set the world alight. She remembered the feeling of a perfect pirouette, the world blurring into a symphony of color and light as she spun perfectly balanced on the knife's edge of control and abandon. She remembered the burn of a grand jeté, the split second of breathless suspension where she felt she could touch the sky. That was grace. Not the delicate, polite version Chloe Davenport embodied, but a fierce, powerful grace born from struggle and strength. Then came the fall. It wasn't a dramatic on-stage disaster. It was a stupid, mundane accident during a late-night rehearsal. A patch of condensation on the floor, a misplaced step during a complex lift. She had been practicing a piece for the senior showcase, a piece that was supposed to be her audition for the New York City Ballet. She heard the snap before she felt the pain. A sound like a dry twig breaking, followed by a searing white-hot agony that shot up from her ankle to her spine. The diagnosis was brutal. A compound fracture, multiple torn ligaments. The doctors used words like reconstructive surgery, permanent instability, and chronic pain. The worst phrase of all was career ending. Her world didn't just crack. It atomized. The stages she dreamed of vanished. The music in her soul went silent. Maestro Petrov visited her in the hospital, his usually stern face etched with a profound sadness. He held her hand, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "The body may be broken," he had told her, "but the dancer inside you is not. Do not let this be the end of your story, Isabella." But it felt like the end. At the same time, her mother, a seamstress who had worked her fingers to the bone to support Bella's dream, fell ill. A rare autoimmune disorder. The scholarship money stopped. The savings dwindled. The dreams of dance were replaced by the harsh reality of medical charts and prescription costs. So Bella did what she had to do. She traded her point shoes for sensible orthopedic server's shoes and her leotards for a scratchy polyester uniform. She learned to ignore the ache in her ankle and the much deeper ache in her heart. Now, standing at the edge of the dance floor in the Grand Astoria, the past came rushing back. The glittering ballroom around her dissolved, replaced by the mirrored walls of her old studio. In the reflection of the polished marble, she didn't see the tired waitress. She saw the ghost of the 17-year-old girl with fire in her eyes and a world at her feet. She looked over at Chloe Davenport, who was doing a series of delicate, ostentatious stretches, showing off her flexibility to the adoring crowd. Chloe was a beautiful dancer, Bella could see that. Her lines were clean, her technique flawless. She was a perfect porcelain doll, but Bella could see the lack of soul in her movements, the hollow precision of someone who had learned the steps but never felt the music. Then she looked at Damien Sterling. He was watching her, his arms crossed, a smug, predatory stillness about him. He thought he knew what this was, a power play, a public execution. He saw a clumsy waitress in ugly shoes. He didn't see the years of sacrifice, the rivers of sweat, the blood she had literally spilled for her art. He didn't see the dancer. Let him watch. She thought, a cold resolve hardening within her. Let them all watch. The band leader, a man with a slick tuxedo and a confused expression, approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, a special unscheduled performance tonight. What will the music be? He asked, looking nervously between Damien and the floor manager. Damien waved a dismissive hand. Something classical. A waltz. He wanted something traditional, something with rules where Bella's lack of formal training, as he assumed, would be glaringly obvious next to Chloe's perfection. But Bella spoke up, her voice cutting through the air. "No," she said, "not a waltz." All eyes turned to her. The waitress was now dictating the terms. She walked over to the band leader, her limp, barely noticeable, masked by a newfound purpose in her stride. She leaned in and whispered a title to him. The man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He looked at his musicians, who began shuffling through their sheet music with a renewed, excited energy. This was a change from the dreary society standards they usually played. Bella walked back to her starting position opposite Chloe. She took off her comfortable, ugly work shoes. The crowd gasped. She was going to dance barefoot. She needed to feel the floor. She needed the connection to the ground, the source of her power. Damien Sterling's smirk faltered for the first time. This was not going according to his script. The girl wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was taking control. As she stood there barefoot in her simple black dress, a sense of calm washed over Bella. The fear was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that was left was the floor beneath her feet and the ghost in the glass, the girl who had never really left. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt the familiar, thrilling anticipation. The silence before the first note. The silence in the celestial ballroom was no longer just a pause in conversation. It was a living, breathing entity, thick with anticipation and judgment. Every phone was out, every screen glowing as the 1%ers prepared to record the impending train wreck for their social media amusement. Damien Sterling settled back into his chair, taking a deliberate sip of a freshly delivered glass of champagne, his eyes cold and unwavering. He was the director of this play, and the final act, the humiliation of the help, was about to begin. The band leader tapped his stand, the musicians raised their instruments, and a single mournful note from a bandoneon, an Argentinian concertina, sliced through the silence. It was not a waltz. The music that filled the room was not the gentle, predictable 3/4 time Damien had expected. It was the smoldering, defiant, and complex pulse of Astor Piazzolla's Libertango. It was a song of rebellion, of freedom, of passion, breaking its chains. It was a tango, but a nuevo tango, one that shattered old rules and created its own. It was a declaration. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. This was not society dance music. This was raw, emotional, and dangerous. Damien's glass froze halfway to his lips. His expression for the first time was one of genuine confusion. He glanced at the band, then back at Bella. This was her choice. The barefoot waitress had chosen one of the most difficult and emotionally demanding pieces of music to dance to. An act of pure audacity. Chloe Davenport was the first to move. As a professional, she knew the tango. She launched into the dance with technical brilliance. Her steps were sharp, her posture immaculate, her movements precise as a scalpel. She performed the ochos, the ganchos, the boleos with a perfection learned in 1,000 classes. The crowd murmured in appreciation. She was a machine of beauty, executing every step flawlessly. She was dancing at the music, imposing her technique upon it. Bella, however, remained still. For the first few bars of the music, she simply stood there, her eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. The crowd began to whisper again. "She's frozen. She can't do it." Damien's smugness began to return. She had overplayed her hand. The pressure had broken her. But Bella wasn't frozen. She was listening. She was letting the music seep into her bones, reawakening dormant muscles and forgotten feelings. The mournful cry of the bandoneon spoke of her loss. The driving rhythm of the piano was the frantic, desperate beat of her struggle to survive. The soaring, passionate violin was the voice of the dancer she had buried alive. Then her eyes opened. And they were not the eyes of a timid waitress. They were blazing. Just as she was about to take her first step, her gaze swept across the crowd and snagged on a figure standing near the back of the room, half hidden by a marble column. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Maestro Anton Petrov. He was older, his hair more silver than she remembered, but his posture was the same ramrod straight, his presence commanding even in stillness. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, but a simple dark suit that looked out of place yet completely natural. Their eyes met across the glittering expanse. She saw shock in his expression, then a flicker of profound recognition, and finally a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of pity. It was a nod of command. Dance, Devochka. Show them who you are. That nod was the key that unlocked the cage. All the years of resentment, of feeling invisible, of sacrificing her soul for survival, coalesced into a single powerful point of energy inside her. She wasn't dancing for her job anymore. She wasn't dancing to win a bet. She was dancing for that girl in the mirrored studio. She was dancing for her mother. She was dancing for Maestro Petrov. She was dancing to reclaim the part of her that Damien Sterling and his world had tried to extinguish. Her first movement was not a step, but a breath. A deep, shuddering inhalation that drew every eye to her. And then she exploded into motion. It wasn't the precise, contained tango of Chloe Davenport. It was something wilder, more primal. She wasn't dancing the steps. She was embodying the music. Her bare feet slapped against the marble, not with clumsiness, but with a percussive, earthy power. Her arms, which had carried trays of champagne, now carved through the air, telling a story of defiance. Where Chloe's movements were sharp and angular, Bella's were fluid and serpentine, her hips swaying with a sensuous, raw energy. She danced alone, but she was not alone. She was dancing with the ghost of her past, the shadow of her pain, the spirit of the music itself. She performed a deep, sweeping lunge, her back arching, her hair fanning out behind her, a move of such powerful vulnerability that a hush fell over the room. Damien Sterling leaned forward, his champagne forgotten. The bored billionaire was gone. In his place was a man utterly captivated. He was watching a language he didn't know he understood, a story told in muscle and bone. He saw the struggle in her sharp staccato turns and the sorrow in the slow, deliberate extension of her hand. Chloe, for her part, began to falter. She was used to being the center of attention, the undisputed star. But she could feel the energy in the room shifting, being pulled away from her perfect technique and toward the raw magnetic force across the floor. She tried to compensate with more elaborate, flashier moves, but they looked hollow, desperate next to the authentic passion pouring out of Bella. The porcelain doll was cracking. The music swelled, the bandoneon wailing a lament, and Bella spun. Not a delicate pirouette, but a furious, dizzying vortex of a turn, her arms thrown wide, her head back, a silent scream of liberation on her lips. She was no longer Isabella Rossi, the waitress. She was Libertango. She was freedom. And everyone in that room, from the jaded socialites to the bartender polishing a glass, was completely and utterly under her spell. The celestial ballroom had ceased to be a room. It had become a universe, and Bella was its celestial body, pulling everyone into her orbit with an undeniable gravitational force. The air crackled. The polite chatter, the clinking of glasses, the very concept of social status, it all dissolved into the background, rendered meaningless by the truth being told on the dance floor. This was no longer a competition. It was a revelation. Chloe Davenport was dancing with her body, but Bella was dancing with her soul. Every movement was a word, every sequence a sentence in the story of her life. A series of sharp, quick footwork. Her bare feet a blur against the marble spoke of her frantic scramble to keep her life together, the relentless pace of her work, the constant worry. Then she would melt into a slow, fluid movement, her body coiling and uncoiling like a serpent, a moment of heart-stopping grace that spoke of the dream she still harbored in the quiet of the night. She used the space in a way Chloe didn't dare. Chloe stayed in her prescribed area, a performer on a stage. Bella consumed the entire floor. She lunged toward the edge of the crowd, her hand outstretched as if pleading, then recoiled as if struck. She spun through the center, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. She was painting the floor with her pain, her anger, and her indomitable hope. Damian Sterling watched motionless. The carefully constructed fortress around his emotions was crumbling brick by brick. He had built his empire on logic, on numbers, on predictable outcomes. He dealt in acquisitions and mergers, in assets and liabilities. What he was witnessing now did not compute. It couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. It was a force of nature as wild and untamable as the stormy sea his eyes were named for. He saw the strain in her muscles, the sheen of sweat on her brow, the grimace of pain that flashed across her face as she put weight on her right ankle. But she danced through it. She took the pain, the ghost of her old injury, and wove it into the performance. A slight limp was transformed into a syncopated, defiant stomp. A moment of weakness became a pause filled with dramatic tension. She wasn't hiding her scars. She was turning them into art. The climax of the music approached a furious crescendo of strings and percussion. Chloe, in a last-ditch effort to reclaim the spotlight, launched into her most difficult move, a series of lightning-fast fouetté turns. On any other night, it would have brought the house down. But tonight it felt like a desperate parlor trick. It was technically perfect, but emotionally vacant. As Chloe spun, Bella did the opposite. She slowed down. As the music raged, she became a point of stillness in the storm. She drew herself up to her full height, her back to the audience, and began a slow, deliberate backbend, her body arching backward further and further, a breathtaking display of strength and flexibility that seemed to defy gravity. She held the pose, her body a perfect arc of tension and surrender, her face turned up to the painted heavens on the ceiling. It was a silent testament to bearing an impossible weight. The crowd let out a collective, audible gasp. Phones that had been recording were lowered. People were no longer just watching, they were bearing witness. Then, as the final crashing chord of the tango struck, Bella pushed off the floor and snapped upright, spinning to face the audience. She didn't strike a triumphant pose. She didn't smile. She stood chest-heaving, hair wild, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to scorch the very air in the room. In her gaze was every injustice, every condescending glance, every moment she had been made to feel small and worthless. It was a look of pure, unadulterated defiance. For a full 10 seconds the room was utterly silent. The final note of the bandoneon hung in the air, vibrating with the ghost of her performance. The only sound was Bella's ragged breathing. Then one person began to clap. It wasn't a socialite or a banker. It was Maestro Anton Petrov. He stood by the column, his hands coming together in a slow, powerful, deliberate applause. It was not polite applause. It was a sound of profound respect, of a master acknowledging a master. His applause broke the spell. A single woman in a diamond necklace rose to her feet, her hands clapping enthusiastically. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire room, the jaded, cynical, impossible-to-impress elite of New York City, was on its feet, delivering a thunderous, roaring, standing ovation. The sound was deafening, a wave of validation and awe that washed over Bella, shaking her to her core. Chloe Davenport stood frozen in her corner of the dance floor, her perfect smile gone, her face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. The applause wasn't for her. She had been rendered invisible, upstaged not by a rival dancer, but by a waitress in a cheap black dress. Bella's eyes scanned the cheering crowd until they found Damian Sterling. He was not clapping. He was not standing. He remained seated, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He was staring at her, and his expression was one she could not decipher. The arrogance was gone. The smugness was gone. In its place was something raw, something shaken, something that looked almost like fear. He had dared a waitress to dance expecting to break her. Instead, she had broken his world wide open. The applause eventually subsided, replaced by an excited, frenetic buzz. The atmosphere of the gala had been irrevocably altered. People were no longer talking about stock prices or summering in the Hamptons. They were talking about the barefoot waitress who had danced with more passion than anyone had ever seen. Bella stood still, trying to catch her breath as the reality of what she had just done began to sink in. The adrenaline started to fade, and the familiar throbbing ache in her ankle returned with a vengeance, a painful reminder of the price of her defiance. Mr. Henderson, the floor manager, was the first to reach her, his face a comical mixture of terror and awe. Miss Rossi, He was speechless. Before he could continue, Damian Sterling was on his feet and striding toward her. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He stopped directly in front of Bella, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. The silence fell once more. Everyone waited for the verdict from the man who had orchestrated this spectacle. He looked down at his ruined jacket, then at her bare feet, then finally met her gaze. His stormy eyes were turbulent, filled with a storm of conflicting emotions. "The bet," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "I believe I owe the staff their tips." He pulled a sleek black titanium wallet from his inner pocket, retrieved a Centurion card, and handed it to the stunned Mr. Henderson. "Tell the bar manager to run this for $20,000. That should cover it. $20,000. A life-changing amount for the kitchen staff, the valets, the servers who survived on meager wages." A wave of grateful whispers rippled from the edges of the room. Damian turned his attention back to Bella. "And the second part of the deal," he said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant, "that you would not be fired." He looked over her shoulder at Mr. Henderson. "She's not fired. In fact, give her the rest of the night off. Paid." He had fulfilled his end of the bargain, yet it felt incomplete. This was a transaction, and what had just happened on the dance floor was so much more than that. It was something he couldn't put a price on, and that fact seemed to deeply unsettle him. He looked as if he wanted to say more, to ask something, but the words wouldn't form. The man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will was for the first time at a loss. It was then that another figure approached, pushing past the curious onlookers. Maestro Anton Petrov. He ignored Damian completely, his eyes only for Bella. He stopped before her, his stern face softened by an emotion she couldn't quite name. Pride, sadness, regret. "Isabella," he said, his Russian accent as thick as she remembered. "I thought I saw a ghost." Tears welled in Bella's eyes. "Maestro." The name was a choked whisper. That was not the dance of a waitress. He said, his eyes scanning her, taking in the cheap uniform and her exhausted posture. That was the dance of an artist, a warrior. "What happened to you?" "Life happened, Maestro," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "Life," he scoffed as if it were a trivial inconvenience. "Life does not extinguish a fire like yours. It only banks the embers." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I am choreographing a new show. Off-Broadway. Experimental. It is difficult. I need a new voice. Someone who understands pain. Someone who is not afraid to be ugly, to be beautiful." He squeezed her hand. "Come see me. We will talk." "This," he said, gesturing to the ballroom, "this is not your stage." It was a lifeline. A door creaking open back to a world she thought was sealed shut forever. It wasn't a promise of stardom, but something better. A promise of purpose. Bella could only nod, tears now streaming freely down her face. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, heart-wrenching relief. Damian Sterling watched this exchange, a silent, powerful observer. He saw the bond between the old man and the young woman, a connection forged in a world he knew nothing about. He saw the hope ignite in her eyes, and he realized with a startling clarity that his money, his grand gesture of paying the tips, was meaningless. He had offered her a prize, but this old man had offered her a future. He felt a strange, unfamiliar pang in his chest. It felt like irrelevance. As Maestro Petrov gave Bella a piece of paper with his number on it and retreated, Damian was left standing before her again. The dynamic had shifted entirely. He was no longer the billionaire judging the waitress. He was just a man confronted with a power he couldn't comprehend and a spirit he had grossly underestimated. Rossi, he started using her last name as if it were a shield. Your performance. It was unexpected. I'm full of surprises, Bella replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her defiance had been replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but the fire in her eyes remained. He seemed to struggle for a moment before finally saying, I was wrong. What I did was unconscionable. The apology, clumsy and unpracticed, hung in the air between them. For a man like Damian Sterling, those 3 words were likely harder to part with than $20,000. Before Bella could respond, Chloe Davenport appeared at Damian's side, her face a carefully reconstructed mask of pleasantness. Darling, what a bizarre little spectacle. Are you ready to leave? You've made your point. Her words were directed at him, but her venomous glare was aimed squarely at Bella. Damian looked at Chloe, at her perfect cold beauty, and then back at Bella with her tear-streaked face, wild hair, and bare bruised feet. For the first time he seemed to truly see the difference between them. One was a flawless, polished surface. The other was a raging, beautiful, authentic fire. He turned away from Bella without another word and let Chloe lead him away. But as he walked toward the exit, he glanced back over his shoulder one last time. Their eyes met across the crowded room. And in his gaze, Bella saw the certainty of one thing: this was not over. 2 days later, Bella was back in her world. The celestial ballroom felt like a fever dream. Her reality was the cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens that smelled of her mother's lavender sachets and the chicken soup simmering on the stove. Her mother, Maria Rossi, sat propped up in a comfortable armchair, a blanket over her lap. Her illness had made her frail, but her eyes, the same warm brown as Bella's, were bright with spirit. The $20,000 had been divided among the staff, and Bella's share, just over $600, was a godsend. It paid for the next round of Maria's medication and kept the landlord at bay for another month. She'd taken the night off, but Mr. Henderson had called begging her to come back, promising her the best shifts. The Grand Astoria now saw her not as a clumsy waitress, but as a legend, a curiosity. She hadn't decided if she would return. The piece of paper with Maestro Petrov's number sat on the kitchen table, both a promise and a terror. To call it meant stepping back into the world that had broken her. To not call it meant letting the fire die out for good. A knock on the door startled her. It was late afternoon. She wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping her hands on a dish towel, she opened it and her heart stopped. Damian Sterling stood in the drab hallway of her apartment building. He was not the imperious billionaire from the gala. He wore simple dark jeans, a gray cashmere sweater, and no tie. He looked human. In his hands he held not a briefcase but a simple bouquet of white tulips. The sight was so incongruous, so utterly out of place that Bella could only stare. Mr. Sterling. She finally managed her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I believe I still owe you an apology, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual commanding tone. A proper one, without an audience. He glanced past her into the small, clean apartment. May I come in? Hesitantly, she stepped aside and let him in. He seemed to fill the small living room with his presence. He looked at the worn furniture, the framed photos of a younger dancing Bella on the mantelpiece, the stack of medical pamphlets on the coffee table. He was seeing her life, not just her uniform. Maria Rossi looked up from her chair, her eyes wide with curiosity. Bella, who is this handsome young man? Mama, this is Damian Sterling, my boss. Damian stepped forward, a surprising gentleness in his demeanor. He offered the tulips to Maria. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Rossi. These are for you. Maria beamed, taking the flowers. Please call me Maria. Thank you, they're beautiful. Bella told me what you did for the staff. That was a very kind thing to do. Damian's gaze flickered to Bella. Kindness had very little to do with it. It was a debt I owed. He turned back to Maria. Your daughter is an extraordinary woman. Bella, flustered, went to the kitchen to put the tulips in water, her hands trembling slightly. She could hear them talking, her mother's warm, open nature disarming the famously guarded billionaire. When she returned, Damien was looking at a photo of her on the mantelpiece. She was mid-leap, about 16 years old, radiating joy and effortless talent. Juilliard, he stated, not as a question. I had my assistant do some research. Isabella Rossi, full scholarship. The prodigy they called La Bella vanished after her second year. He looked from the photo to her, his eyes full of a new understanding. The injury. Bella nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. And then my mother got sick. Life happened. No, Damien said, turning to face her fully. You said that at the gala. It's a convenient excuse. The truth is, I happened. People like me in rooms like that, we create an atmosphere where life happens to people like you. We build our comfortable world on top of 1,000 broken dreams we never have to see. His confession was raw, honest, and completely unexpected. Why are you really here, Mr. Sterling? Bella asked, her voice steady. Damien, he corrected her. And I'm here because for the first time in a very long time I felt something that wasn't boredom or ambition. Watching you dance. It was like watching someone burn down a building they were trapped inside just to feel the warmth. I recognized it. He walked over to the window, looking out at the brick wall of the building next door. I have a sister. Had a sister. Her name was Lily. She died when she was 9, a congenital heart defect. We had all the money in the world, the best doctors, but we couldn't fix it. She loved to draw. She wasn't a prodigy, she just loved it. It was the only thing that made her feel free. He paused, his jaw tight. The gala. It was for the Children's Hope Foundation. My family is their biggest benefactor. It was Lily's favorite charity. I go every year, I write the check, I smile for the cameras, and I feel absolutely nothing. It's a duty, a monument to my failure to save her. He turned back to face Bella, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. When I was belittling you, talking about your lack of grace, I was standing in a room dedicated to my dead sister who found grace in a box of crayons. The hypocrisy. It's suffocating. He took a step closer. Watching you, I saw what she had. That pure, unfiltered passion. The thing that money can't buy and science can't fix. And I tried to crush it. I tried to humiliate it because I couldn't stand to see it. Because it reminded me of everything I've lost and everything I've become. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a clock. Bella felt the anger she had held onto toward him dissolving, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man haunted and broken in his own gilded cage. I can't give you back the years you lost, Damien said, but the world needs to see you dance. Not just in a one-off performance, but properly. He slid a business card onto the table. It was not for Sterling Enterprises. It was the card of a renowned orthopedic surgeon at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Miller is the best reconstructive surgeon in the country. He specializes in career-restoring surgeries for athletes and dancers. I spoke to him this morning. He's reviewed your old files. He thinks he can help. He thinks he can get you back to 90%, maybe more. All expenses covered. And that includes the best physical therapy money can buy for as long as it takes. Bella stared at the card, her world tilting on its axis. And your mother? He continued, his voice softening. I've also taken the liberty of arranging a consultation for her at the Mayo Clinic. My family foundation will cover all costs for her treatment, no matter what it is. This was beyond charity. This was atonement. He wasn't just throwing money at a problem. He was trying to rebuild the world he had helped tear down. I can't accept this, Bella whispered, overwhelmed. This is too much. It's not enough. Damien countered, his voice thick with emotion. Consider it another debt. Not for a spilled drink, but for reminding me what it means to be alive. He looked at the paper with Maestro Petrov's number on it. Call him. Get the surgery. Get your life back, Isabella. Then come and find me. Not as a waitress, not as a charity case. As an equal. I want to see what you build when you're finally free. 9 months later, the stage was no longer a polished marble ballroom, but a minimalist black box theater in the West Village. The air smelled not of expensive perfume but of sawdust, sweat, and possibility. The sound was not the clinking of champagne flutes, but the squeak of dance shoes on the floor, and the steady, focused breathing of dancers. At the center of it all was Isabella Rossi. She was no longer in a uniform. She wore simple black leggings and a gray tank top that showed the sculpted muscles in her back and arms. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her feet, once bare on the marble, were now encased in soft jazz shoes. There was a faint silvery scar on her right ankle, a map of her journey, but there was no limp, no hesitation. When she moved, it was with a newfound power, a fusion of her old fire with a mature, deliberate strength. Dr. Miller's surgery had been a success, followed by 6 months of grueling, relentless physical therapy. Damien had been true to his word. The best care, the best facilities, all handled silently and discreetly. Her mother was in remission, her new treatment plan at the Mayo Clinic working wonders. For the first time in years, Bella's life was not about survival. It was about building. She had called Maestro Petrov. He had welcomed her with open arms, not as a broken prodigy, but as a collaborator. She wasn't just dancing in his new show. She was choreographing a central piece. Her piece. It was a duet that told the story of a caged bird and the storm that set it free. From the top, people, she called out, her voice confident and clear, echoing in the theater. The dancers got into position. She hadn't seen Damien since that day in her apartment. They had exchanged a few brief formal texts regarding her mother's progress, but nothing more. He had given her space. He had given her freedom. And in that freedom, she had rediscovered herself. The anger was gone. The bitterness had faded. What remained was a deep, quiet gratitude and a curiosity about the man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to help her find her best. As the dancers began the piece, the theater door creaked open at the back. A figure slipped into the last row, trying to remain unnoticed. But Bella felt his presence, a shift in the energy of the room. She glanced toward the shadows. It was him. Damien Sterling sat in the darkness, watching. He looked different again. More relaxed, the perpetual tension in his shoulders gone. He watched the dance, his face not with the captivated shock of the gala, but with a quiet, profound reverence. He was watching her creation, her vision come to life. He was seeing the result of his atonement. After the rehearsal, as the dancers packed up, Bella walked up the aisle toward him. "You came?" she said simply. "You told me to find you when I was free," he replied, a small smile touching his lips. "I thought I'd save you the trip." They stood in the quiet theater, the ghosts of the dance still hanging in the air between them. The power dynamic was gone. The labels of Billionaire and Waitress were gone. They were just a man and a woman, two people who had collided in the most dramatic way possible and had emerged changed. "Thank you, Damien," she said, her voice filled with a sincerity that went beyond words. "For everything. You gave my mother her health. You gave me back my dream." "You're wrong," he said, his stormy eyes soft. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." He gestured to the stage. "What you're building here, it's incredible. It's real." He paused, then added, "My sister would have loved it." An usher came through, sweeping the floors. It was time to go. They walked out of the theater together into the cool evening air of Greenwich Village. The city lights twinkled around them, no longer a symbol of a world that excluded her, but a backdrop to her new beginning. "So what happens now?" Bella asked, an unspoken question hanging between them. "Now," Damien said, stopping on the sidewalk and turning to face her fully. "I ask you a question. Not as a bet, not as a dare, just a question." He took a small breath. "Isabella Rossi, I'm going to a terrible, boring charity dinner tomorrow night. I was wondering, would you do me the honor of being my dance partner?" Bella looked at him, at the genuine hope in his eyes, the vulnerability he now wore so openly. She thought of the journey, the spilled wine, the cruel dare, the tango of defiance, the painful recovery, and the quiet dawn of this new life. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "I'd love to," she said. "But this time we do it my way, and you'd better be able to keep up." And so a story that began with a cruel dare in a glittering ballroom transformed into a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Isabella Rossi's journey wasn't just about a dance. It was about reclaiming a life that was stolen from her, about finding strength in her scars, and about proving that true grace isn't about wealth or status. It's about the fire you refuse to let anyone extinguish. And for Damian Sterling, it was about learning that the greatest assets you can ever acquire are empathy, humility, and a second chance. Their story reminds us that beneath the surface of everyday life, extraordinary stories are waiting to unfold. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone completely defied expectations? Have you ever had a moment that changed the entire direction of your life? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and captivate you. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single moment of drama, hope, and transformation. Thank you for watching.